Pacific Army. The faint light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a soft glow over the dark expanse of the ocean. The USS Independence rocked gently on the waves, its massive form cutting through the waters off the coast of Taiwan. On the flight deck, the early morning air was cool and brisk, filled with the salty tang of the sea. Captain Jake Eagle Foster stood at the edge of the deck, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was an American fighter jet pilot, one of the best in the Navy. He had flown countless missions over the years, from the deserts of the Middle East to the icy reaches of the Arctic. But there was something different about this deployment, something that set his nerves on edge. The geopolitical situation in the region was tense, with rising tensions between China and Taiwan putting everyone on high alert. The USS Independence had been stationed off the coast for weeks, a show of force and support for the Taiwanese government. But the threat of conflict hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. Jake had always loved the early morning hours, the quiet before the day truly began. It was a time for reflection, for gathering his thoughts before the chaos of the day took over. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the wind on his face, the distant sound of the ocean mingling with the hum of the ship's engines. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the day ahead. He had been on the ship for months, living in the tight quarters with his fellow pilots and crew. The camaraderie was strong, forged through shared experiences and the knowledge that they were all in this together. But it was also a lonely existence, far from the comforts of home and the people he cared about. Jake had left behind a family in Virginia, a wife, 2 young children who he thought of constantly. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, the ship's PA system crackled to life. All hands, prepare for flight operations. Pilots, report to the ready room. The voice of the ship's captain echoed across the deck, pulling Jake from his thoughts. He made his way to the ready room, where the other pilots were already gathering. The room buzzed with a mixture of excitement and tension, the air thick with the smell of coffee and the faint scent of jet fuel. The pilots, dressed in their flight suits, exchanged nods and murmured greetings as they took their seats. Commander James Bull Thompson, the squadron leader, stood at the front of the room, his face set in a serious expression. He was a seasoned veteran, with years of experience in the cockpit and a reputation for being tough but fair. Jake respected him immensely, knowing that Bull had seen it all and was someone you wanted on your side when things got rough. "Listen up, everyone," Bull began, his voice commanding attention. "We've got a full day ahead of us. Intel indicates increased activity in the area, so we'll be conducting regular patrols along the Taiwan Strait. Stay sharp, follow protocol, and keep your wits about you. We don't want any surprises out there." Jake listened intently as Bull went over the details of the mission. They would be flying SAP Combat Air Patrol missions throughout the day, ensuring the safety of the ship and its surrounding waters. The threat was real, and they had to be ready for anything. As Bull finished the briefing, Jake felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the thrill of the upcoming mission pushing away any lingering doubts. After the briefing, Jake headed to the locker room to gear up. He donned his flight suit, checked his helmet, and slipped on his gloves. Every movement was precise, practiced, a ritual he had performed countless times before. But there was always that edge of anticipation, the knowledge that each mission could be his last. He made his way to the flight deck, where his F/A-18 Super Hornet awaited. The sleek, powerful jet gleamed in the early morning light, its engines rumbling softly as the ground crew made final preparations. Jake ran a hand along the fuselage, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers. This jet was more than just a machine. It was an extension of himself, a tool of war that had saved his life more times than he could count. "Eagle, you're cleared for takeoff," the voice of the flight controller crackled in his earpiece. Jake climbed into the cockpit, strapped himself in, and went through his pre-flight checks. The instruments blinked to life, the HUD displaying all the vital information he would need once he was airborne. With a deep breath, he pushed the throttle forward, feeling the powerful roar of the engines as the jet surged forward. The G-forces pressed him back into his seat as the jet hurtled down the deck, the ocean rushing past in a blur. And then, with a sudden lift, the jet was airborne, climbing rapidly into the sky. The morning sky was clear, a deep blue expanse stretching out in all directions. Jake leveled off, setting a course towards the patrol zone. The world below seemed distant, almost unreal, as the jet soared above the waves. He felt the familiar sense of freedom, the exhilaration that came with flying at supersonic speeds. But even as he reveled in the flight, Jake remained focused on the mission. His eyes scanned the horizon, his fingers ready on the controls. The skies were peaceful, but he knew that could change in an instant. The tension between China and Taiwan was at a boiling point, and any misstep could lead to conflict. Hours passed as he flew his patrol, the sun climbing higher in the sky. The ocean below sparkled in the sunlight, the coastline of Taiwan visible in the distance. Everything seemed calm, but Jake knew better than to let his guard down. The radio was alive with chatter from the other pilots, their voices filled with the same mix of vigilance and determination. As the day wore on, the first sign of trouble came just after noon. A radar contact appeared on his screen, a small blip moving towards their position. Jake's pulse quickened as he adjusted his heading, moving to intercept. He radioed in the contact, his voice calm but alert. "Control, this is Eagle. I've got a bogey on radar, moving fast. Closing in on it now." The response was immediate. "Copy that, Eagle. Proceed with caution. We've got your back." Jake's eyes narrowed as he focused on the incoming contact. The tension in the cockpit was palpable as he closed the distance, the jet's powerful engines roaring as he pushed it to its limits. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a Chinese fighter jet, sleek and menacing, cutting through the sky like a predator. His instincts kicked in, and he quickly assessed the situation. The Chinese jet was moving fast, heading straight towards the USS Independence. It wasn't uncommon for Chinese aircraft to test their boundaries, probing the defenses of the American forces stationed in the region. But this one was too close, too aggressive. "Bogey in visual range," Jake reported, his hand hovering over the weapon controls. This could get ugly. The Chinese jet made no move to change course, its intent clear. Jake's training took over as he maneuvered his jet into position, ready to respond to any hostile action. His mind raced as he considered his options, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But before he could act, the Chinese jet suddenly banked sharply, turning away from the Independence and heading back towards the mainland. Jake exhaled slowly, his grip on the controls loosening slightly. It had been a close call, a reminder of just how fragile the situation was. "Bogey is retreating," Jake reported, relief mixing with the lingering adrenaline. "Standing down." The rest of the day passed without incident, but the tension remained. Jake completed his patrol and returned to the carrier, landing smoothly on the flight deck as the sun began to set. The orange and pink hues of the sunset bathed the ship in a warm glow, a stark contrast to the cold reality of the day's events. Jake made his way to the mess hall, where the other pilots were gathered. The atmosphere was subdued, the near miss with the Chinese jet weighing heavily on everyone's minds. They exchanged stories, shared a few laughs, but there was an undercurrent of seriousness that couldn't be shaken. After dinner, Jake retreated to his quarters. The small, cramped space was a far cry from the comfort of his home, but it was familiar, a place where he could relax and unwind after a long day. He pulled out a photo of his family, the edges worn from being handled so often. His wife, Sarah, smiled up at him from the picture, their 2 children, Emily and Jack, beaming at the camera.